Welcome to this explainer on the absolutely epic history of Japan. You know, if you look at Japan today, it's this incredible land of bullet trains, neon-lit cities, and immense natural beauty. It's literally one of the most open and sought-after tourist spots on the planet. But honestly, that level of global integration is a surprisingly recent plot twist in their grand history.
Okay, let's really dive into this. How on earth did an island nation transform from entirely locking out the world for centuries into the global hub we know today? Because for well over 200 years, right from the 17th up to the 19th centuries, Japan's borders were firmly, unequivocally closed to outsiders. And yet, ironically, it was this exact lockdown that gifted the nation with so many of those iconic cultural treasures we still admire today. So how do we get from there to here?
Well, to understand that journey, we're going to unpack about 40,000 years of history, and we'll do it across 6 distinct eras. We'll start with emperors and early influences, move into the age of the samurai, then look at unification and total isolation, follow that up with modernization and the Meiji era, step into the path to war, and finally, wrap up with the post-war economic miracle. All right, kicking things off with Era 1, Emperors and Early Influences, the Roots of the Rising Sun. Let's see how Japan's earliest foundations were actually heavily shaped by borrowing ideas from mainland Asia.
So the earliest human settlers migrated to the Japanese archipelago from the mainland roughly 40,000 years ago, and they brought vital skills with them, things like agriculture and metalworking. By the 3rd century AD, a centralized power structure started to take shape around the Yamato region. But the truly fascinating part here is just how openly early Japan embraced mainland culture. In 552 AD, they imported Buddhism directly from Korea, and then, less than a century later, in 645, they passed the Taika reforms, which completely remodeled their political landscape to mirror the Chinese system. They basically copy-pasted a proven imperial structure. Eventually, by 794, the emperor set up a permanent capital in modern-day Kyoto, kicking off a massive 400-year golden age of high imperial culture.
Moving right into Era 2, the Age of the Samurai, or the Rise of Military Rule. See, as that imperial court down in Kyoto became super obsessed with their own internal politics, centralized power started to collapse, paving the way for regional warrior clans to rise up.
Because the emperor was essentially neglecting everything outside the capital, real power slipped right into the hands of local noble elites. These regional warrior clans, backed by the sheer military might of their samurai, grew massively powerful. After some pretty brutal clan wars, a guy named Minamoto Yoritomo finally crushed his rivals. In 1192, he managed to convince the emperor to grant him the title of shogun, which translates to great general. He then set up a totally separate military government in Kamakura, safely far away from the emperor's court. This one-power move effectively made him the de facto ruler of all Japan, and it actually kicked off an unbelievable 700-year streak of continuous military rule.
Now, the samurai's strength faced the absolute ultimate test when one of the largest empires in human history turned its sights toward Japan. Back in 1265, Kublai Khan, yes, that Kublai Khan, of the massive Mongol Empire, demanded Japan submit as a vassal state. Japan completely ignored him, so the Mongols launched 2 full-scale invasions in the late 13th century. The tension here was massive. Japan's very survival was literally on the line.
And this perfectly illustrates the legendary defense of Japan. During the first invasion in 1274, the Japanese defenders were severely, hopelessly outnumbered. But suddenly, out of nowhere, a massive typhoon swept through and practically decimated the Mongol fleet. Miraculously, when the Mongols tried again in 1281, they faced the exact same outcome, wiped out by yet another devastating typhoon. The Japanese named these insanely timely storms kamikaze, which means divine wind. And yeah, that is exactly where that famous term originated, centuries before World War II.
That brings us to Era 3, unification and total isolation, guns, chaos, and lockdown. Because despite surviving the Mongols, internal disputes ended up plunging the country into a chaotic civil war, setting the stage for a massive technological shock.
Picture this. It's 1543, and a Portuguese trading ship blows off course, landing in Japan. The European traders on board brought something the Japanese had never, ever seen before: muskets. The feuding warlords instantly saw the tactical advantage here. I mean, just 13 years later, by 1556, a staggering 300,000 firearms were being actively used in Japan's civil wars. Talk about fast early adopters.
Visionary leaders like Oda Nobunaga leveraged this new European gunpowder tech to completely turn the tide and begin finally unifying the country.
Eventually, a leader named Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged victorious in the year 1600, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate. But this new leadership grew highly suspicious of foreign influence, especially the spread of Christianity brought over by the Portuguese. So they made a drastic, almost unthinkable decision. In 1639, they implemented a harsh policy called sakokoku, which effectively sealed Japan's borders entirely from the outside world.
Now here's the really fascinating part. Despite these extremely punitive measures, nobody could enter, no Japanese could leave on pain of death, and the only Europeans allowed were a tiny handful of Dutch traders confined to one artificial island. This extreme lockdown actually birthed a golden age. It triggered the Edo period, which was a 268-year stretch of uninterrupted peace. The economy boomed, Japanese arts went through a profound cultural renaissance, and the population literally doubled to 30 million people.
But on to Era 4, Modernization and the Meiji era. The black ships arrive. Because as we know, the pendulum of history rarely stays in one place for long. Japan's cozy period of total isolation came to a very sudden, very forceful end in 1853. That's when a fleet of overwhelmingly superior American warships, led by Commodore Matthew Perry, just steamed right into Edo Bay. The U.S. government was fully prepared to use military force to pry Japan's ports open to international trade. Completely unable to match the sheer firepower of the Americans, the reluctant shogunate really had no choice but to absolutely capitulate and open the country to Western commercial interests.
As you might guess, this capitulation totally humiliated the shogunate and infuriated a lot of people within Japan. It actually sparked the Boshin War, which toppled the military government and handed supreme power back to the young Emperor Meiji in 1868. We call this the Meiji Restoration, and it was a stunning, absolute leap. Much like they did with those European muskets centuries earlier, Japan adapted at lightning speed. Desperate to avoid being colonized by Western powers, the new government rapidly transformed the nation from a feudal, isolated, samurai-led society into a modern, global, imperial-led powerhouse. We're talking laying down railways, establishing universal education, and completely overhauling their military with the latest Western tactics.
Which leads us directly into Era 5, the path to war, empire and crucible. Armed with this newly modernized standing army, Japan started looking outward, basically aiming to replicate the colonial empires of those Western powers.
They began aggressively expanding their territory. They absolutely stunned the world when they defeated Russia in 1905. This was the first time in decades an Asian power had defeated a Western one. They annexed Korea in 1910, but over the ensuing decades, this really intense nationalist and expansionist sentiment took hold, leading to further aggressions in China and Southeast Asia. The international community was alarmed, to say the least, and the United States responded with harsh economic sanctions to cripple Japan's war effort. Feeling completely cornered and desperate to secure their gains, Japan forged an alliance with Germany and Italy in 1940. Then, in December 1941, they launched that infamous preemptive surprise attack on the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor. This pulled the U.S. right into World War II, sparking a fiercely devastating conflict across the Pacific.
Realizing that a ground invasion of Japan would be unimaginably costly in terms of human lives, the United States utilized a newly developed secret weapon. In August 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, causing well over 100,000 deaths. The crucial takeaway here is that this era of rapid imperial expansion ended in ultimate, absolute devastation. Facing incalculable destruction, Emperor Hirohito took to the national radio to formally announce Japan's surrender.
And that brings us to Era 6, the post-war economic miracle, from ashes to dominance. Following this devastating conflict, Japan entered its sixth era. Disarmed and operating under Allied occupation led by General Douglas MacArthur, the nation fundamentally shifted its entire focus.
Guided by leaders like Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, Japan completely turned its back on military might. Instead, they directed every single ounce of their energy toward economic development and democratization. Fueled by this immense, almost unbelievable work ethic of the Japanese people, the nation underwent an absolute economic miracle. Just think about the sheer scale of this recovery. By 1955, the economy had already completely surpassed its pre-war levels. And just a little over a decade later, in 1968, Japan rocketed up the global charts to become the world's second-largest capitalist economy.
Leaving behind the hostilities and the intense divisiveness of the past, Japan rebuilt itself upon entirely new pillars. They established themselves as the absolute global leader in automobile manufacturing, and they became a dominant, massive player in the booming electronics industry.
Honestly, a lot of the cars you drive and the smart devices you use every single day are a direct result of this massive post-war pivot. They successfully forged the peaceful, highly developed, tech-savvy global powerhouse we all recognize today.
So, when we look back at the massive scope of this history, from openly absorbing mainland culture, to establishing centuries of military rule, to enforcing extreme isolation, to fierce imperial expansion, and finally, to this miraculous economic rebirth, we see a nation defined by its incredible, almost superhuman ability to adapt. Japan has completely transformed itself multiple times over. So, looking forward into an increasingly connected world, we're really left to wonder, after 40,000 years of profound change, where is the pendulum going to swing next for Japan?